What if I told you the decades-long struggle between pursuing long-term growth and achieving short-term sales is rooted in a myth, and going broad for the brand and targeted for performance is wrong? According to new research from TransUnion and MMA Global, you can achieve your short-term goals without sacrificing long-term sustainable growth with a single audience strategy by focusing on the group of consumers most receptive to your advertising, your brand's movable middles. Don't waste another dollar on audiences who won't respond to your ads. To learn more, download TransUnion's new white paper at transunion.com/mm.
Hey there, I'm Asa Heiken, technology reporter at Ad Age, and welcome to another episode of the Marketer's Brief podcast, our weekly discussion about marketing news and trends that have the industry buzzing. AI as an emerging technology needs no introduction, but one consequence of its mainstream popularity is that companies joining the space have a hard time distinguishing themselves. Agencies, brands, and startups have saturated this market with advertising-focused products that sound similar in name and function. Encapsulating this issue is the ubiquity of the sleek but nebulous term AI-powered. Today, we'll be talking with David Placek, founder and president of Lexicon Branding, which devises brand names for companies and their products. Over the past year, Lexicon has focused on AI, helping clients name their businesses and tools to stick out from the growing crowd. David will discuss research conducted by Lexicon that shows what's working and what isn't working when it comes to branding AI products, with respect to both consumer and developer perceptions. David will also share his thoughts on that sneaky buzzword, AI-powered, as well as future branding considerations for new developments like AI agents. Now, here's my conversation with David. Hi, David. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
My pleasure. Glad to be here today.
So, Lexicon conducted 2 phases of research on AI branding, and in the first phase, reported that extreme hype around generative AI may have a negative impact on brand credibility, and brands should thus proceed with caution. Can you unpack this for us and what you mean by caution?
So this is, I'll talk about our second wave in a moment, but really the whole purpose of this research is for us to really have an understanding of what are the perceptions about AI, both from developers, so I'm going to talk about that, and from consumers. And so we've done this research in the US, Europe, and now this last phase, we added South Korea. So in that first phase, lots of buzz, lots of expectations about this is really going to change my life. It's going to change my schoolwork. It's going to change, how I relate to my kids, all these sorts of things, right? People thinking going beyond the assistant, the Amazon Echo, et cetera, or Siri. In the second wave, what we found is that people are now disillusioned about it. Like, well, this really hasn't changed my life. The exception is developers are far more positive about this as a creative tool, kind of a co-creation tool, not really just a creative tool, but they actually use the phrase co-creation tool, whereas consumers are more or less, I'm going to watch this and wait, with a broad perception that over time, AI will bring benefits, but not right now, with the possible exception of the healthcare industry, where that level of added intelligence may make diagnoses and other things faster, safer, better, more accurate.
Oh, so the hype has really changed between April, May, and September when the second phase, did it happen in the span of those handful of months, or was this sort of a long time coming before that?
Our perception is that it literally happened during that time. Everybody was aware of it. Everyone really, the one brand that everyone is familiar with is ChatGPT. When you ask people about, well, have you ever, consumers, now developers will know about Perplexity and Gemini and these other things, Claude or even Grok. But consumers have gravitated in this research to their awareness of ChatGPT. And so in that time of experimenting with it that's a considerable amount of time to try out how this thing can really help you. that's where the disillusionment began. The hype began to, arc down and disillusionment arc up.
So, how do brands respond to this disillusionment, especially given that 6 months ago there was still a lot more hype, but now the consumer perceptions have changed so dramatically?
Well, the first thing is, and it's an old cliche, but I think it's appropriate, is under promise a little bit and over deliver at least a little bit. So the second thing is, I think both on the developer side and the consumer side, is think about adding a creative dimension to whatever your brand is, either in your copy or in the name itself. And it doesn't have to be use the word creative, or it doesn't have to come out with Da Vinci or something like that, but something that is more human, has energy and more movement is one of the things we're looking at in terms of one possible creative strategy. Really depends on what the product is. If you're creating some AI for, a navigation system where it is actually adding a lot more intelligence and security, maybe that has to be more of a synthetic name versus something on the consumer end, which is, should be more of a co-pilot name, which, by the way, is a great name. And Lexicon was not involved in that program at all, but you can see there's a human element there. It's not saying we're the pilot, we're doing everything for you. It's saying we're the co-pilot. So that's an example of where we would look to do more of those names, not mimicking co-pilot, but other metaphors and analogs in that area. That makes sense.
So, in that first phase of research conducted by Lexicon, you advise brands to put emotion at the center of their AI product. And as you just mentioned, sort of humanizing a bit. Does this apply for tools that are both consumer facing and enterprise facing, or really just one or the other?
I would say it applies to both, because you really want something that has appeal. At the same time, you want something that's distinctive, right? I mean, you have to have a memorability here in a very cluttered space. I mean, every week we're getting invites from companies to talk to them about helping them brand yet another AI product, service, technology. And so if we think there's, a number of AI brands already in the marketplace, you're going to see a lot more. So you still have to say, okay, we got to be distinctive, we got to be memorable. But I think, being approachable, whether you're on the developer side, B2B side, or on the consumer side, is always the right strategy.
And now, so in the second phase of Lexicon's research, you looked more deeply at the consumer perceptions around AI, and as you mentioned, this sort of new disillusionment. And one perception that has emerged is the idea that an assistant, promoting a tool as assistant, is not enough to intrigue customers. Can you unpack that a little bit more, and whether that applies specifically to enterprise and developers, or it applies to consumers as well? And on top of that, how sort of brands can say a lot with kind of such few words, potentially only one word in their name?
Well, let me back up a little bit. So when we think of assistants now, Siri being a great example of this, that was consumers' first glimpse of what AI was about. Like this, Siri is somehow driven by this notion of artificial intelligence, right? And so what we saw in our research is that that's sort of ground level or ground zero for what AI is about. As consumers, and I'll talk about developers in a moment, as consumers began to experiment, particularly with ChatGPT, they saw it elevated a bit beyond that assistant, but not fulfilling the promise. Yes, I can do a prompt. I need to write a paper on the American election and what it means. And, ChatGPT will certainly help you do that. It'll write it, but it still has to be repaired. It has to be drafted, edited. So the magic that they expected was not there, right? Now, what we hear from them in this research, and it's quite reliable research in terms of its statistical probabilities, is that they see over the horizon the wow factor and higher expectations, and results will come back. But they've really dialed down their expectations for this. Developers, on the other hand, are still very, very positive. They have more awareness. They have more brand awareness. I mean, you can talk to developers and they'll say, yes, I've experimented with this. I learned this from Gemini. Consumers see NVIDIA as a AI brand, even though it's the brand behind, running these other large language models. The other thing that is interesting is that developers much more in the know about the technology. There's no surprise there, but they're also looking very positively for not just these very large language models and that type of artificial intelligence, but smaller, more customized, tailored language models that might be way more appropriate for a hospital or a surgical procedure or something like that, where you need a lot of information concentrated in a space. And so I mean, I didn't have that thought before, that realization. And I remember just, because in our research, we not only did a quantitative survey, but then we reached out to some of our clients who were developers and some of our consumers and just had one-on-one conversations. And that's where I learned that. Hopefully this is helpful to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, what you just mentioned there, the specific, smaller, more specific AI systems, that is in the direction of AI agents, which we're hearing about more and more. And AI agents, just to be clear, are these very specific bots that are autonomous, and they're supposed to be the next iteration of AI, and instead of just kind of in a rote fashion going out and giving you some information or performing some task, it can sort of think ahead, it can reason. But what this lends itself to are a variety of new tools, new tasks that can be serviced by these tools, and probably a lot more branding opportunities for all kinds of companies that are rolling out these kinds of products. For AI agents and these very specific AI systems, do the same rules apply for branding, or do companies need to think a little differently about, okay, I'm not branding an all-purpose Gemini type machine. I'm instead branding a very, very specific agent that books flights for people, like something like that. Do you see a similar kind of strategy there?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money. I think this is a different strategy, different approach, depending on obviously always what you're naming. But I think as you look for agents who are doing something very specific, the name should be more specific, right? I'll use the word perhaps even more practical, right? Now, there is that creative challenge because you want to be more specific, more practical, maybe a compound solution like a PowerBook or a Facebook, something like that, right? That is now more specific and less multidimensional. But at the same time, we can't lose distinctiveness and memorability and attitude, right? Which is what brands are built around, either behavior or attitude. So it's going to be more challenging, but you're absolutely right. I think it's going to take a different creative strategy for those we'll call them agents that are emerging in the marketplace. And by the way, I think that's where the wow will come back. The dissolution will begin to drift down even more, and expectations will go back up.
Okay, great. Let's take a quick break for this message from our sponsor.
For today's marketers, efficiency is the name of the game. But maximizing the impact of your marketing budget with a movable middles audience isn't just a theory, it's a proven fact. Based on findings from TransUnion and MMA Global, nearly a dozen brands, from consumer packaged goods to banking, boosted their ROAS by up to 23 times when they targeted movable middles, outperforming every other commonly used audience strategy. To explore how movable middles can help you make the most of your ad dollars, download TransUnion's new white paper at transunion.com/mm.
So in the ad space, as well as other fields, a lot of these products, these AI products, seem to go for some catchy one-word name, as do a lot of companies in the tech space, just to kind of be punchy, to be memorable. But according to Lexicon, highlighting simplicity may not be as advantageous as these marketers think. Why might this be the case? And why might complexity actually be something that these marketers should sort of retain in the branding of their tools?
Well, there's a real balancing act here between setting a general expectation with something like, character AI, Gemini AI, and even chat's a very simple word, right? And then beginning to develop a brand that has a very specific promise to do something that more work, more productive work, or more helpful work. And so that sort of, hey, look at me, I'm cool, I'm Gemini, may not be the appropriate. There's going to be, that gravitational pull on the part of all clients. I should have something, simpler and provocative and cool and all that I understand. But we might see, two word or expressions come back into this thing, so not too far from us, our offices is the firm, Industrial Light and Magic. Maybe there is something like, hey, I use industrial light, two separate words coming together. I mean, we're going to start experimenting with how do we name things in this, what I call this emerging agent world. We don't, that's why we're doing the research, because I don't have the answer for you today. But our next wave of research, which we'll let you know about, will probably come out in early spring, and we'll see what is, by then, this market's moving pretty fast and perceptions are changing quickly. So we'll see. But we see ourselves in the middle of a branding challenge, and we're trying to get that information that will allow us to lead the marketplace here.
So I want to ask you about the term AI powered. This is something that has come up just all the time in my inbox, in all kinds of product releases, right? A company sort of releases a product, puts AI powered there. Maybe it is very AI powered. Maybe it's more a case of AI washing, which is sort of exaggerating the role that AI is playing in that tool. But AI powered seems to be everywhere. And it seems to be an effort to really use AI as a marketing force in itself. But is AI powered actually conferring the value that brands think it does in promoting these tools?
We have no evidence that it is communicating that. It is, there's a lot of pressure from the boardroom to, hey, we got to get into this whole AI thing. And so you see this AI powered, right? Now, I think there's general awareness on the consumer end that many things have AI in it. I mean, AI just didn't pop up a couple of years ago. It's been in development for years and years and years. But this AI powered, although it can be used as a copy point, I don't think elevating it to, something that is really part of your marketing toolkit is going to help anyone. I think if anything, it just is like you're buying a new household cleaner, a new formula of Tide, and it says Tide Plus. People ignore it, right? There's too many pluses out there. So it's the same thing of, we advise people that, okay, you can be, alpha.ai, but that doesn't make you an artificial intelligence company, right? Okay to use it, but don't think that that is going to all of a sudden make you more of a sophisticated artificial intelligence company. It's all taken for granted now.
Yeah, and AI powered has really, it's continuing this tradition of smart in front of technology. And there are other examples, but sort of this seemingly valuable word that ends up getting diluted because everyone's sort of using it. So it does feel like maybe early on there was some actual value in saying AI powered, but now that it's so ubiquitous, it really, if everything's AI powered, nothing's AI powered.
Yes, and I think their history will give us a lesson here. If we go back 25, 30 years ago, .com was the AI of its day, right? Where, hey, we got to get the .com. Many of our clients would say, no, I have to have the name and .com even, and we had clients pay $1 million for that URL, right? Now that really is pretty meaningless. It's an area code. It's a zip code, and whether it's .ai, .biz, .io, it's just an address, right? So I think that's what's going to happen here with AI. Is just going to be another zip code.
So last question here, David.
Yeah.
We see a lot of tools out there that include the letters GPT in the name,
Yes.
clearly drawing off interest in ChatGPT.
Yes.
But is it fair game to use that term even if that brand has no formal partnership with OpenAI, which introduced the first GPT models?
Yeah, very, very good question, and actually an interesting one. So you're probably aware that ChatGPT attempted to register to create a trademark for ChatGPT and also for GBT. And both of those applications were denied. Now, I don't know at this point in time, they may be going back and trying to get those things, but they were denied because they're fairly descriptive in the category. People talk about in common language, hey, let's have a chat. GBT, which very few people even know what it means, but it's generative pre-trained transformer, right? It's a type of a language model, which they did invent, and I think they probably created a description, but it just got out, in the marketplace so fast without any kind of control. So that's kind of the background. To answer your question, does that really help anyone that it's GBT on the end of something? Can they, first off, can they use it? Probably, although I'm not a lawyer and I don't know if OpenAI has filed, another application for that. I just think it's imitative, and in branding, you never want to be an imitator. So if a client came to me today and said, "Hey, should we use this?" I would say no. You're driving into the future, looking through the rear view mirror.
Those are wise words to end on, David. Thank you again for joining Ad Age's Marketer's Brief podcast.
It was a pleasure.
That was David Placek, founder and president of Lexicon Branding. And I'm Asa Heiken, technology reporter at Ad Age. I'd like to thank our producer, Lauren Chiardio, and remind you that you can subscribe to Marketer's Brief wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.
Marketer's Brief listeners get $40 off an adage.com subscription. Sharpen your marketing edge and visit adage.com/brief for your discount.